Blessings, beloveds. Anastasia, Cosmic Astrologer. Thank you so much for tuning in. Going to share some considerations and reflections on the full moon in Scorpio with you guys. So I posted something on the community section on my Facebook page as well about Osiris, the asteroid, actually forming a conjunction to this full moon. However, I'm left slightly perplexed and confused because there are two different platforms. So, for example, the software Solarfire, which is what I use, and I've never ever come across an error, so I don't really know exactly what's going on. But anyway, in my software, in the Solarfire software, it shows that Osiris is at around about 15, 16 degrees of Scorpio, which is conjunct this full moon. However, on another ephemeris, and ephemeris is basically calculations, right, of tables showing you where a given body is transiting at the moment or at any time for that matter. So the particular ephemeris online shows that Osiris is actually at about 12 degrees of Capricorn. So given the discrepancy, and I was unable to clear that up, even though I did a fair bit of investigation, I'm just going to leave that out of the picture because I'm not certain whether it's there or whether it's not. So I just wanted to raise that straight up because I did mention that I would be talking about it, and I'm not now. And you know what? In in reflection, we don't really need Osiris there with that full moon, actually. The full moon in Scorpio is fully loaded unto itself anyway. So before I talk about that, I just want to share that I've just spent the last couple of hours in the sun just absorbing the beautiful solar rays, the solar codes into my whole system in order to bring that through into today's reading. I do feel really energized. I do feel really optimistic, actually, and quite calm as well. I did a fair bit of chanting as well before I came on to sit down and do this video, and there's lots of different mantras and chanting styles and so forth, but one of the ones that I use specifically is the Maha mantra, which is the Hare Krishna mantra, actually, and that came into my field of experience around about 6-7 years ago with a particular devotee, you could say, who travels the world, and he and his wife just basically travel, I think, just virtually every country there is, and they just do their offering, their divine service through chanting. And it's the reason I'm mentioning it is because I don't know if you've ever experienced chanting, but I highly recommend that you explore it, because when you want to talk about releasing the heart chakra, opening the heart, and releasing limitations, right? Because see, the full moon in Scorpio is going to take us exactly into that zone of where we are limited and where it is we need to further evolve. The basic essence of Scorpio is the evolutionary impulse to evolve, right? So a full moon naturally is going to illuminate that to quite an extreme. So chanting is a process, an experience, and a journey that really smashes your heart open, basically. And if you have underlying anxieties or traumas or fears or whatever it is, that the chanting more or less purifies the heart. It's a spiritual experience, but it's also a physical experience. You can literally feel the energy vibrating in your body when you're actually chanting, specifically the Maha mantra. It's so extremely powerful and cleansing and healing and purifying. And Scorpio is about purification. So I've just spent the last probably hour chanting here by myself at home with my favorite person's audio music chanting, that when I sit in that space, or actually I don't sit, I dance when I do it. It's like electrical impulses running through my body, and it's really a process of shedding, you're really shedding energetically and clearing yourself up. So I wanted to bring that in because if any of you have not tried it, just give it a go and allow yourself to have the experience of whatever it might be for you, because it's unique for all of us, but certainly a very therapeutic and healing process and experience to engage in, and something that I feel really needs to be done quite frequently. So it's a bit like sitting in deep meditation. That's another process of cleansing, healing, and going into deeper layers of your consciousness, and detaching from the apparent drama, the sort of the maya, the illusory sort of experience of, if you like, of this world, although it feels very real, of course, because on the one hand it is, but on the other hand, it's not the whole picture. It's not the main game, as I like to say. So, full moon in Scorpio. Well, a couple of weeks ago we had the new moon in Taurus, of course, and it's always the case that we have a new moon and then 2 weeks later we have a full moon. So this is not an eclipse of any kind. It's a regular kind of full moon, but it's got some really wonderful aspects to it, which is very fortunate for us. Great aspects by Pluto and Jupiter, both to the sun and the moon. I'll talk about those in a moment. There is a square by Mars that's going to throw a bit of a spanner in the works, if you like. But I think I'd like to just give some thoughts from the level of how this full moon is likely to express itself, show itself from a collective perspective, given the current global conditions, which are such that are still quite challenging all around the world in different ways. See, Scorpio is the archetype that brings us face to face with who we are not, and who we actually can't be, which is why it is the archetype that it takes us deep into that process of seeing, with X-ray vision, if you like, exactly the things that I just said, who we are, who have we become up until this point. If we take it back to when the new moon happened in Taurus, which was conjunct Uranus, which was a very, very powerful new moon, depending on what sort of intentions that you set in play, you might actually now see what has come to light for you on that level relative to Taurus and relative to Uranus as well, which is always about individuation. In other words, it's about the progress and discovery of your own authenticity, who you actually are and who you are becoming at the most authentic level. That's Uranus. So that kicked in a couple of weeks ago, and now in the Scorpio full moon, we have this process of illumination, naturally, because the full moon is always the experience of illumination of everything that is right here, right now. And because Scorpio is the archetype from a collective level, the influence, I think, is going to be secrets being revealed, right? So there is, and I've said this before, and I don't want to, go on about it too much. We're all aware of it. There is so much information that's coming forth, and there is so much misinformation, misguided information, fabricated. There's all sorts of theories and stories and allegations and assumptions that have created quite a mass sense of confusion, which is the Neptune in Pisces. So I think this full moon in Scorpio, for better or for worse, is really going to bring into some focal point and clarity some of the secrets that have been held, right? So relative to the information that's been provided to us regarding everything that is actually going on. That's one level. I mean, that's really kind of, for me, that's at the personality level, right? Because the archetype of Scorpio at the personality level, it correlates to secrets, mysteries, compulsions, obsessions, paranoia, things like that. So I think this lens is just going to kind of open something up where we will actually see in greater depth some of the mystery around what's actually going on, right? So that's one clear possibility from a collective level. And I think what's going to feed into that even more is that the transiting nodes of the moon, which have been in the signs of Cancer and Capricorn the last 18 months, are ready to transition into Gemini and Sagittarius. And that's a really, really, really important shift from an evolutionary perspective collectively. And I will actually possibly create another video to go into the meaning of those moon's nodes, that transition relative to Sag and Gemini. So the north node is going to be in Gemini, the south node is going to be in Sag. But I think it's important to touch on it from the level of this full moon, because they transition into those signs with this full moon. So that's pretty important, because if Scorpio is the archetype that connects to secrets and things being shown and revealed, in addition to our own individual evolutionary process and path of coming to a place where we can see now remember, the last full moon we had was last year. It was a year ago. So it was quite a long time ago. So we are now at a very different place, cosmologically and evolutionary wise, and individually and collectively, relative to where we were, a year ago when we had the last full moon in Scorpio. So what's being revealed to us now is so connected to what we've had to confront actually in ourselves and in our own journey, specifically because of the restrictions and limitations that have been imposed on us. And there's many different ways that people are observing that experience or responding or reacting to it. And if we respond to it or react to it from the personality level, the only thing we're going to discover is that we are frustrated and angry and annoyed and feel as though our freedom and liberty, has been taken away or compromised. But honestly, when you can rise above those centers within your own self, which is the personality, the lower centers, and this is where chanting really helps as well, because the process of chanting is a process where it starts off quite slowly. The chanting, the mantra, right? It starts off quite slowly. Usually a session goes for about 90 minutes or 60 minutes. And you're starting off really slowly. So you are adjusting yourself into these very subtle levels and layers within you in order to connect to something quite deep. And then as you progress through that 60-minute or 90-minute period, there's an intensification, right, and a speeding up of the chanting, which is it's a bit like ecstatic dancing, if you've ever done anything like that. So the intensification that occurs through your body is this vibration that takes you above the personality, takes you above what appears in the material and the physical, which is why I recommended chanting when I first started speaking 20 minutes or so ago. So that's also connected to what's going on now from the level of what's being revealed to us because of where we have arrived in our position relative to the current conditions, right? So in other words, this forced lockdown restrictions and so forth has placed, billions of people on the planet in a situation that is quite unfamiliar, right? In that you've had to share a space consistently, perhaps, with family, friends, whomever you live with, to a degree that is not, I wouldn't say it's not natural, but I would say it's not typical. So the hundreds of different challenges that people have been confronted with during this process has been a revealing process of where we ourselves further need to evolve and grow, and where it is that we are still maybe stuck, and also what have we sort of been denying or not recognizing in our own journeys. So the space that we're forced into, including not being able to to have the external freedom and to go to work, to go to the gym, to go to wherever it is, whatever your life contains, on a day-to-day basis, all of that has been sort of intensified in one space, your home, right? So we have literally been forced to have to examine our life on those levels. So this full moon in Scorpio it's kind of like the climax, if you like, the intensified journey of what's been happening the last couple of months. And now here comes the full moon in Scorpio. And it shows you very, very clearly and honestly and brutally where you stand relative to all of your relationships. So it's a very intensified energy on that level. And I mean, in addition to that, it's also important to look at, well, where is the full moon in Scorpio in your birth chart, and what aspects does it have perhaps to, personal planets in your chart as well. There are different outcomes, for different people. It just depends on how much awareness you are bringing in to your daily life, especially at a time like this, where there's this what feels to be an experience of limitation. It's an experience of limitation relative to the world of the personality, right? Because the personality is connected to the external world, the world out there. It's always about activity, action, movement externally, right? So the process of having to step back from all that is, it can take you into the subtle levels and layers within you. But if you resist that, and if you've been resisting that, then it's probably just created more conflict and tension. And the full moon in Scorpio is going, like I said before, for better or for worse, it's going to show us, zoom into all those layers in our life that we either were not prepared to look at, couldn't look at, whatever the case may be. So I have somebody that I know very close to me at the moment, who has an elderly mother who's basically dying. So she's getting ready to transition. And this full moon in Scorpio has triggered off this particular person's natal moon. It's forming a very close square to this person's natal moon. And this person's natal moon and Pluto is in the 12th house. So she has a Moon-Pluto conjunction in her 12th house. And so here comes the full moon in Scorpio, forming a square to her natal Moon-Pluto in the 12th. And unfortunately, at least at the moment, it's intensified the unconscious components and fears relative to that Moon-Pluto conjunction in the 12th. So it's a really intensified experience for this particular individual, which is all about death and rebirth. So we can have those sorts of deeper experiences with this full moon in Scorpio, is what I'm trying to say, depending on what's going on in your life. There is, there is a different journey for all of us, right? But as a general sort of theme and as a collective experience, the full moon in Scorpio is a time of purging, basically, the things that need to be purged, obviously, the things that you have outgrown, and also the confrontation of where your resistances and limitations actually exist within your own self, and therefore then just get filtered out into your life, your relationships. So Scorpio is the archetype of power, personal power, and personal transformation. But we can't go through some kind of transformative journey if we are not able to remove things and to recognize our own, basically our own limitations. So Scorpio, it's it's so hard to put into words sometimes. Scorpio is a water sign, so, and it correlates to the soul. So to try and frame and put language around those deeper experiences that we enter, either sometimes through force, meaning circumstances force us into entering those spaces, or sometimes willingly, just depends where you're at. There's you can't, it's not a Gemini experience. You can't say, well, it's this that connects to this, that connects to that, and sort of connecting the dots, which is what Gemini does. You just have to feel it. You just simply have to feel the energy of this full moon without trying to put language around it, which becomes quite a limiting experience. We just have to feel it. And the feeling it takes us into the domain of the soul. Scorpio, Pluto. Still waters run deep. If you enter those still waters, there's no language there. It's purely a feeling experience, and it can feel terrifying, or it can feel completely exhilarating, because you are able to transform something about yourself. On an esoteric level, Pluto and Mars correlate to Scorpio just as they do on an exoteric level. So even if we look at this full moon from an exoteric level and from an esoteric level, we come back to the one main body, which is Pluto, right? And Mars, but Pluto, really Pluto. And Pluto in esoteric astrology correlates to ray number 1. And ray number 1 is it's basically your willpower, but we're not talking about willpower from the level of Mars, which equals or equates to your personality desires, as it were. Pluto is the will of the soul. So we've arrived at a point collectively with this full moon where there's this emergence of the highest will within all of us, and then the collective will. Basically, it's trying to take us into the next level of evolution. Think about what's happening around the world at the moment. This is not some small little glitch in the matrix. This is a pretty big deal, what's going on. And it is actually the earth ascending. It is us actually transitioning into a new way of living and understanding. But there's many that won't come on board, and there's many that still resist. Regardless, from an esoteric perspective, this full moon being ruled by Pluto is the activation of the highest will, the collective will, and the will within all of us that correlates to the soul's will. So that's the force and energy that's coming through. The first ray, which correlates to Vulcan and Pluto in esoteric astrology, is the concept is will power destroyer of form, the urge to rule, the vehicle for creative initiation on all levels. And the soul level description for ray number 1 is the use of spiritual will for the benefit of the collective, power utilized for the purpose of enhancing unity and beauty, the expression of will for the purposes and well-being of the group. So we're talking about an energy that's coming through the full moon that on a spiritual level, it actually is about leading us into unison and unity, but it has to destroy certain aspects of the form, which is basically what's been happening for a little while now anyway. And think about the Hindu gods and goddesses. I think about Kali and Shiva, which are gods, deities, gods, goddesses that correlate to coming into the 3D reality. At least it's about transforming and purifying and purging the earth of the form and structure and attachments, really. So getting back to that chanting thing, when you're actually experiencing a chanting process with a specific mantra, you can do a Shiva mantra. There's hundreds of mantras, but even the one that I use, which is the Maha mantra, the experience that I had just before I came on to do this video, it was a really powerful, rejoicing experience of, it's sort of hard to put into words, but it's a rejoicing feeling in my heart of things being transformed and cleared, just form being cleared and destroyed, which is, Kali is the goddess of destruction. And, if you see images of Kali, she looks, some might say she looks sort of demonic, if you like. And that just comes down to, perception. We always have to understand that there is darkness and light, there is yin and yang, there can't just be one, not here on this 3D reality. So the darkness that has to be smashed, that has to be transformed, is part of this full moon in Scorpio as well. It's the darkness sort of coming through in order for it to be seen and then transmuted, transformed, smashed through, annihilated. Pluto, the soul, Scorpio, deep transformation. So this is the energy of the full moon for the collective. And as I said, when we go into our own personal life, then it's about checking out where this full moon. I'm just going to share my screen and bring up the chart. What's it doing in your own personal chart, right? So here is the full moon in Scorpio chart. This is drawn for Melbourne, and so obviously your location is going to place things in a different place. So don't worry about where everything is. All we need to look at is, here is the full moon in Scorpio. It's at 17 degrees and 20 minutes. There's the sun right opposite, 17 degrees, 20 minutes, right? Taurus, Scorpio, that's the full moon. Now, the great thing is that Pluto, which is the ruler of Scorpio, happens to be forming a sextile aspect to this moon. And so is Jupiter, for that matter. And, Jupiter in Capricorn is very much about the social reform on a global collective level that's taking place. And the Pluto and Jupiter forming a sextile to this moon, sextiles are always about opportunity. And Pluto-Jupiter is forming a trine to the sun, and a trine aspect means that whatever bodies we're talking about, so here we're talking about the sun, Pluto and Jupiter, the sun being in an earth sign and the sun being, in a full moon phase at the moment. It's basically suggesting that the transition in the next level that we've arrived at relative to evolution, that through this full moon, we have support in transitions that are going to occur relative to Jupiter and Pluto, because we're talking Earth to Earth. That's a trine aspect, and a trine it's kind of like a break. It's a positive break, like a break from the universe, saying, okay, I'm just going to support this process with a transition that's necessary, but in a way that feels supportive as opposed to cataclysmic. So trines are supportive energy, supportive process, and a process that flows with no real major great tension, that's for sure. And also, because these planets are sextile the moon, there is an opportunity, right, relative to this full moon, to be able to dive deeply into your own fears and resistances, or recognition of who you are, who you are not, and who you can't be. You know, the process of evolution, because it's connected to Pluto, it's always about drawing in experiences into our lives, which include relationships, in order for us to have an experience which enables us to recognize and see what we actually are not, and what we are still looking to evolve in. So relationships that act like mirrors always bring these sorts of things into our field of experience. So it's kind of like, as the soul is evolving, we are constantly, we have these impulses towards attracting situations and people into our field of experience unconsciously, because the soul recognizes in that person or in that situation, well, here's something that I don't know what this looks like for me. I don't know what this experience is. So let me draw and attract that person or that situation in to my field of experience, so that I can learn what I am and what I am not, right? And this process of attracting in experiences and then sort of repelling them as well is how we evolve. We don't know what we need to evolve through until we bring that experience into our field, right? So that's what Scorpio helps us to do, and Pluto, of course. So relative to this full moon, highlighting, illuminating where you have arrived relative to this process. The Jupiter-Pluto sextile it's saying that, well, there's an opportunity here with this full moon, you know, if you are receptive to it, right, relative to Pluto and Jupiter. There's an opportunity. What is the opportunity going to be? Clearly, it's going to be an entirely unique thing for every single one of us. It can't be the same for all of us. We're not all the same. We're every single one of us are totally unique. So from a collective perspective, however, this is suggesting that whatever comes through this full moon relative to information being revealed, secrets being revealed, it's going to be an opportunity that can help us move forward, really, because we've sort of been a little bit stuck with the current conditions, and there's still extreme uncertainty with what the world is going to look like moving forward, because I don't even know if we're halfway through yet. We may or we may not be. But the point being that this full moon has the loaded support by the trines and sextiles from Pluto and Jupiter, which is saying that the transition, the transformation that we are stepping into and that's coming into consciousness is going to have a supportive element. The thing that throws it a little bit out is the, well, look, it's it's a wide sort of square, but then again, even Jupiter is quite wide relative to a sextile and a trine. So it just depends, people use different orbs, they have different allowances and so forth. Pluto is definitely closer, so therefore the strongest body of influence relative to this full moon is Pluto, because it's in closer proximity than any other planet is, right? Unless, of course, we want to bring Venus, which forms an inconjunct, but I'll just leave Venus out for now. I think what's really important here is the Pluto, because Pluto actually rules Scorpio, so it's forming a sextile and a trine. That's transitional energy flowing through without friction and tension. The wide square from Mars, so Mars is in a T-square with the sun and the moon, with the full moon. You can see that Mars is at 26 degrees of Aquarius, and Aquarius squares Taurus and Aquarius squares Aries, right? So there's the T-square, and usually a T-square is quite a difficult configuration. And Mars, as what we call the apex planet in this configuration, Mars is quite an impulsive, aggressive type of energy, especially at the personality level. It is in Aquarius, so this Mars can potentially bring up some angered expressions or desires around what appears to be happening relative to our freedom, right? Aquarius. But again, Mars is fairly far away relative to Pluto. Pluto is much closer. So I'm not too concerned about that Mars, but I think it's still there in the mix. And I think that can just be a source of activation relative to, some things being expressed where people are still not very happy about the current conditions and so forth. But, we always have to remember that even this situation is temporary. It feels like it's been going on forever, but it hasn't, and it won't. And it's at the highest spiritual level, it is absolutely necessary that what is happening is happening. And if you filter it through the conspiracy theories, and I'm not saying the conspiracy theories don't have any truth in them, I'm not making any comments on that stuff. Whether you believe a particular theory or perception, it actually doesn't really matter, because what matters is that the evolution of the planet and the evolution of the planets are not something that we dictate to or have control over. The planet and the planets evolve in their own way, in their own accord, in the same way that we as individuals and as souls are also evolving in our own unique way as well. So if you just filter through the darkness and see it only through the darkness, then you're just going to be, absolutely left in a position where there's an inability to find meaning, deeper meaning, more hopeful meaning in the drama of what's actually taking place on planet Earth at the moment. But if you have that deeper understanding, understanding, connection to the divine plan, because there is a divine plan. It doesn't matter if there are dark forces and dark people, manipulating this or doing that or hiding this information or planting this or planting that. It doesn't matter. It's just part of the drama. And the transition of where we're heading is so much bigger than the apparent perceptions or theories or uncertainties. It's so much bigger than that. It's so much bigger than just me standing here alone, so much bigger than you, where you're sitting right now. It's not about the little I. It's about the big I, the will, the divine will. So Always, always, without question, when you can come to some kind of center within yourself where there's the ability to anchor yourself in what may feel like is out of your control, and to have that trust, that inner trust and inner faith, is to trust the divine plan regardless of what's appearing. It's just fundamental. It's not a left brain thing. Now, just to bring in a couple of points about the nodes, speaking of the left brain, you can see here that the nodes, the transiting moon's nodes, right, are now into Gemini and Sag. This actually happened today, right? Today's the 5th of May. And this full moon is going to be on the 6th and 7th of May. So it's a couple of days away. So we're building up at the moment. And the nodes only just shifted into these signs today. And these transiting nodes belong to the frequency of this full moon, because one way to understand, and this is just a snippet, just a tiny portion of the picture of what's to come, because these transiting nodes are going to be in this polarity, this Sagittarius-Gemini axis, for the next 18 months. And it is a collective transition and process of evolution. So we've come from the South Node in Capricorn and the North Node in Cancer. So for the last 18 months, we've had to collectively undergo a journey and an experience that has meant to take us back into the heart center, Cancer, into nurturing, taking care, loving. And why has that been important? Because if we look at the grand scale of everything, it is love that not only is it the highest force and frequency, but it is the thing that has been lacking on the earth relative to human activity and behavior. So the nodes being in the sign of Cancer has meant something within us has had to reawaken that sense of love and nurture and care for ourselves and for everybody on the planet, right? In short, that's what it's taken us through. And of course, the South Node in Capricorn has meant breaking down all the old structures and systems, which we've been doing and which we are smashing through at the moment. So the transition into Gemini and Sag, this is going to be a really interesting journey. And, you know, I can talk about this for hours, but I'm not. I'm just going to make a couple of comments for this video. The North Node in Gemini, very simply put from an evolutionary perspective, is suggesting and saying that there is new knowledge, new information that's going to be transmitted to the earth and into every single one of us. This new knowledge and information, which is Gemini. Gemini is knowledge and information, period. This new information that's coming through, if we look at the South Node in Sag, which is the wisdom, the truth, the element of truth and wisdom correlates to the archetype of Sagittarius. So there is new information coming in that we are ready to assimilate into our consciousness. And this is simply going to be the distinction. The distinction is going to be that there will be so much information streaming through that many will jump on a particular path relative to information that's coming forth. And unfortunately, the shitty side to this Gemini component is going to be that there can be a lot more information that can create a lot more confusion. And Gemini, don't forget, is ruled by Mercury, and Mercury was the trickster. I mean, at higher levels, Mercury, is like he's a messenger, but the messages that he can transmit can vary, because Mercury was the one planet that traveled in the upper and lower dimensions. That's why he's the god of the messenger of gods, right? So here we have an 18-month period projecting forward, where we're going to be given information, new information. And when I talk about new information, I'm talking about new information that we are not aware of, that we haven't been aware of, that's streaming through for us to assimilate. And why? Because we have to create a new world. It's just gotten to that level where the world could not go on any longer, really, in the way that it was, relative to everything: food, water, nature, animals, lifestyles, beliefs, just everything, really, and an accumulation of thousands of years of energy and systems. So there's going to be transmission of new information, knowledge that's going to come through. And our responsibility with that journey is to assimilate the information and knowledge through wisdom. We have to incorporate it into ourselves so that we can actually act in wise manners moving forward as we are evolving. So that's basically, in a nutshell, what that North Node in Gemini is just starting right now. And the reason I think this full moon could reveal some secrets is because the North Node's in Gemini as well, and Gemini is about information. So we're likely to hear some things in the next few days, perhaps, and it could just be for the next couple of weeks where this energy is just cultivating, where we receive different knowledge, different information. And that might create more confusion, and it may not. It just depends on what information comes forth and how you discriminate, you yourself. We have to discriminate the information that comes through, and we have to somehow recognize which information is going to be truly valuable in order to progress forward into creating a new earth, and which information is just, the lower sort of the lower cerebral mental Gemini sphere of information for the sake of information. If we just absorb the information and it just stays there on the left hand side, the left brain, then it's just an overload of information that actually has no meaning and purpose, right? Which is why we need to employ the right brain, Sagittarius, intuition. But we can't, it's very simple, because this is a process that exists in our everyday life, right? We have a left brain and a right brain that's functioning all the time, right? So throughout our life, we absorb and learn information through Gemini, the left brain. And we sort through that information. And in order to actually expand it and go into deeper levels, or levels that actually show us that, well, this information actually has real meaning to it. It has a purpose. For me to learn XYZ is going to have this particular purpose and outcome. But it's an intuitive journey and pathway through it. So this Gemini Sag thing is happening with us all the time. Information, right? Sag, bigger picture, meaning, truth, vision. And this is what we're going to be going through from a collective perspective. It's just that the information that's going to come through over the next 18 months is going to be new information that's going to help us actually evolve into this next transition, this next worldly experience, where the world is going to look very, very different. And, look, unfortunately, as I said, if people remain at the Gemini level of things, it's going to be chaotic from the level of our thoughts, our perspectives, and the information that we are exposed to. So we have to be really responsible individually with what it is we're actually saying and transmitting and putting out there and sharing and preaching and whatever. We all have a duty and a responsibility around that, right? So that's the energies of what we're looking at with regards to this full moon in Scorpio. Overall, it's a pretty good full moon from the level of the aspects that it has a pretty supportive. Neptune's actually trine the moon as well, sextile the sun. So Neptune adds it's trine, so that's good, because if it was squaring this full moon, there'd be further confusion that could be projected, through hysteria, right? But it's not. It's actually forming a trine, so that's kind of saying that spirit, divinity, truth, source creation to all things, is coming through very nicely into this full moon. It's sharing its vibration and energy into the full moon in Scorpio, which is about looking at who you are not, and who you can't be. That's a pretty confronting thing. Journey, process, experience takes a lot of honesty to do that, don't you think? Be interested to hear in your thoughts and feelings about this. Okay, so, and just finally, also bear in mind that we're right at the very, very strong build-up of a solar eclipse that's coming up, which is in June. 0 degrees of Cancer, that's kicked things off already, without question. Those of you who have things at 0 Cancer, 0 Capricorn, being eclipsed right now. So we have 2 more eclipses in 2020 that connect to the Cancer Capricorn axes, and then because the nodes have shifted into Sagittarius and Gemini, we begin our journey of eclipses this year as well in the signs of Gemini and Sagittarius. So that's going to be a very, very interesting journey relative to truth, information, and the ability to assimilate that where it actually has meaning and purpose and creates, what's the word? Assimilates into us what we really need to understand in moving forward collectively, because we are, without question, moving into a completely different direction. Okay, I'll talk about those eclipses as they come up. So there's a few of them, but the first one will be in next month on the 21st of June at 0 degrees Cancer. So that's the solar eclipse. But there's a full moon eclipse coming up on the 6th of June. And that full moon eclipse is going to be at 15 degrees of Sag, right? So we'll talk about that as we get closer to it. Let's see if there's anything else that I left out. No, I think that's it. I will come back to talk about Venus retrograde in Gemini. She hasn't gone retrograde yet, but she will very soon. And that's obviously, that's a whole journey of values and relationships and a lot of interesting things happening there. Let me just say something. Someone said to me, can I pause when I do these things? Sorry, if you're watching, this won't take very long. Yeah, no, that's okay. I was just having a quick look at something. Okay, so happy full moon in Scorpio. Um, what is happiness? Happiness is fleeting. What is joy? Joy emanates from a deeper place within, which would be through stillness. And so if we can be more accepting of happiness and different moods coming through us, being more accepting that some days, some hours are better than others, and observing it rather than judging it, which requires being objective and detached, can assist in the process of just working through that, whatever it is. So, and I'm saying that because the full moon in Scorpio, without question, is going to intensify people's feelings on things, on life, on their own stuff. And with Scorpio, we always face our sort of darkest, deepest shadow stuff, but we face it through an experience of feeling it. Scorpio is all about feelings. So even within that process and journey and experience, again, we have to accept. We have to accept who we are not, and who we can't be. I really love that statement. I actually, that's out of one of my books. I didn't frame it like that myself. It's out of one of my books, but it really struck me when I read it relative to what's going on at the moment, because again, through all these worldly experiences that we're having at the moment relative to this COVID thing and whatnot, that's see the COVID thing and stuff that's happening, that appears to be happening from governments, from whatever, all the social restrictions, reforms, whatever's happening on those levels. It's secondary. It really is secondary. And the primary reality is actually what the soul is desiring to evolve through. Personality is secondary, external. If we can always come back to that, you will be in a much stronger position within your own self relative to whatever challenge you're going through. And look, some things take a long time to heal and to recover from. So I'm not suggesting it's easy. I'm still healing from something that happened 3 years ago. I haven't completely healed through that, but it's, that's connected to my dad transcending, right? So yeah, I'm not sure I'll ever completely recover from that, to be quite honest. But that's how it is, when it's experiences of the soul that open your heart up in ways that you can't put language around it, and you can't put time around it. It's just there. It's just always there. So yeah, I think it's important. That's an important point as well, because it's not like we are, at least here in this 3D reality, we're supposed to get to a level where we are just um, we're rid of, you know, every single trauma, pain, and suffering. You know, that those experiences are part of our soul's journey. So it comes down to the perception, right, and the judgment around whatever experience you have, because every experience that comes to you has come to you. Why has it come to you? Why has it come to you? It's come to you for very specific reasons. So judgment um, just keeps you locked in, whereas observation, recognition, understanding, and understanding helps you grow, evolve, and be liberated as well. Just some further reflections. Okay, I'm going to go now. See you guys really soon. Thanks for tuning in and watching, and hopefully you were able to get some pointers from this. Also, just one last thing, Chiron opposite Juno, that's a big one, and that's I wrote a little post about that, and that's happening until the 10th of May, so we've only got a few more days of that. But I think that's been a pretty challenging opposition with Juno and Chiron relative to relationships, and I know plenty of people around me really struggling with their own autonomy and desires versus what the partnership or relationship needs might be, and so forth, and the tension and struggle between that. So they're the primary issues that would be coming up with Juno opposite Chiron. But we're going to go into some very interesting period, reevaluation period with Venus retrograde. I'll come back and talk about that. Okay, guys, much love and blessings, and see you soon. Bye.